Okay, I thinks I did it. I thinks. Anyway, good to see you. Hello, good evening. Welcome aboard. My name's Tad Williams. I am a writer. I am a reader. Tonight I will be more of a reader than a writer. Well, I guess I'm reading my own stuff, so I guess there's some of both. Hey, you got chocolate in my peanut butter. You got peanut butter in my chocolate. Anyway, so welcome. Lovely to see you all virtually. I see some of you are already popping in to say hello. There's Jeremy. Hello, Jeremy. And Carl. Hi, Carl. And Leah. Good to see you. Or Leo. Did I ever figure that out? You'll have to tell me. Tim. Hi, Tim. Nancy. Good to see you. Hi, Nancy. Hey, Jerry. And Kenneth. And nice to see you too. And Jared. Yes, thank you. I'll mention that briefly. Emily, hello. And Felina, hello again. And Barban, hello, Barb. Regina, lovely to see you too. John, well, that's cool. Lovely to see you and glad you showed up. Hi, Sean. There's Sean. And who else we got? Kelly. Thank you, Kelly. I'll mention that briefly in passing. Pierre, a great privilege to see you here. Chris. Hi, Chris. Hello, Lynn. Nice to see you too. Okay. So, yes, we've had a tough week at our household because we lost one of our beloved family members, our Chihuahua Frankie, known as Frankie Wah to those who followed Deb's Twitter feed, which for years she was writing in Frankie in first person, telling the story of his devilishness and I suppose charm, because he was both. And it was not something that, of course, we wanted to have happen, but he had been ill, and we were already kind of worried about his long term, and then he took a very fast downward turn over the weekend, and, well, a little bit after that. But anyway, so unfortunately, we couldn't keep him alive anymore because he was just suffering. So we were all a bit devastated, but life goes on. We still have other dogs and people to Leah. Okay, good. Thank you, Leah. That was just an update on how to pronounce Leah's name. But we have other dogs and we have young people and we have all kinds of other things that we have to take care of. So we don't really have time to, just mourn, although we are mourning. And I've been looking through old pictures and things like that, of course. And we miss him dearly. He was very funny. He was dreadful in his personal habits, but he was a natural clown and great fun to watch. And as I mentioned last night in the earlier reading that Deborah once referred to the dogs, our dogs, at the time I think we had 4 of them, but that they were our Shakespearean clowns. And whenever things got too grim, on would come the clowns, and they'd all come spilling into the room for some reason, all excited and thumping and sliding and bumping into each other and yipping and all that stuff. So that is one of the things, of course, that we will miss because Frankie was the most clownish of the bunch. But that said, there have been many, many people offering condolences and kindnesses, and we appreciate that. We really do. And it's been, I know, a tough year for a lot of people in a lot of ways. And, we, like other people, have lost not just animals, but friends and folks that we admired. So, you have to kind of try and find your, level and find your level of priorities and what you can deal with. And so right now we're just trying to deal with staying locked down, which is really pretty much our job at the moment. But we have been able to do work. And as I think I've mentioned a couple times in various readings, I have sent off The Brothers of the Wind, which is the short novel, although now there's some question as to when it's going to come out. It's definitely coming out this year. I had thought June, although it had seemed a little close to production date for me. Now Deborah tells me she thinks it's in the fall. So yeah, I apologize if I gave out wrong information, if that proves to be true and that it is coming out in the fall. It's none of our publishers are in their offices. Everybody's working from home. Everything is kind of higgledy-piggledy. Also, my publishers just got devoured by another corporate merger, and so everything is kind of up in the air. So it's hard to know exactly what's happening about anything, but that's the last word I heard from Deb. Deb suggested it was probably going to be this fall. And then, of course, I'm working on Navigator's Children, and Deb and I are trying to finish up the last, the third volume of the Ordinary Farm books, the all-ages books, and, everything. We're just trying to do what work we can and stay out of trouble as much as possible. Actually, staying out of trouble isn't that hard these days. Not really, since we can't go anywhere. And we can't even... another story for another day. But other than that, we're okay. We're all hanging in, as I hope all of you are too. And basically it. So unless somebody has some specific questions that anybody wants to ask, which you can always put in the thing. I don't always see it during the show, but I can see them afterwards and try to get to them maybe next time or something. Anyway, so with all of that said, I am going to read from The War of the Flowers. I'm guessing we'll probably finish this chapter tonight and maybe even have time to start into the next one. So what you may or may not have heard, all right, main character Theo Vilmos came from the world we all know, specifically the San Francisco Bay Area, was chased out of it by an undead thing which seizes bodies in order to pursue Theo, although he has no idea why, and he was led by a small flying sprite named Applecore through a magical portal of some sort into Fairy. And Fairyland, Fairy, is very modern and very strange. And Theo has discovered while he's been there that he's in the middle of an ongoing war between the richest fairy families, whose families are all named after flowers, which is why it's called War of the Flowers. I'm sure you figured that out already. And he has also discovered that he himself is apparently not actually immortal, not actually a mortal, despite having spent all of his life to this point being pretty sure that he was, as many of us are, or think we are. And he is wound up on a sort of what's the word I'm looking for? A squatter camp on the outskirts of the big fairy city, the main city, which they just call the city because it's the only really big city. And he is with Mudbug Button, a goblin revolutionary, and various others, including a wounded fairy named Streety Nettle, his buddy Cumber Sedge, Applecore, his first friend and closest friend, has been captured by the bad guys, who are the Hellebores. Another one of the bad guy families, the Thornapples. Theo is starting to fall for the daughter of the family, Poppy Thornapple, and we just saw that last chapter where they reconciled after some confusion as to which side both of them were on, and had an evening together, but the evening was ended by discovering that the thing that has been pursuing Theo, the undead thing, the Irha, was after him again and had almost tracked him down, wearing the body of a constable from some time back. But Theo managed to get away with Poppy and has returned to the old Fayfort Bridge by the water and the squatter camp, where all of the goblins and others are essentially hiding out from the authorities. And that's where we are. So chapter 33, The Last Breath They Took. I am pleased that you have come to see me, Theo Vilmos. Theo took a seat on the woven mat across from Mudbug Button. The goblin handed him a bowl and poured steaming water into it from something that looked pretty much like a teapot, but Theo was learning not to make assumptions. Thank you. What is it? Tea. Good. He sipped, blew, then sipped again. It tasted a little bit like root beer and a little bit like cilantro, but it wasn't too bad, and there weren't any small animals floating in it, so he decided he'd leave the inquiry at that. He sat for a moment just holding the bowl. letting his thoughts settle like the bits of leaf drifting down through the tea, although it was a bit hard to concentrate with all the grunting going on at the far end of the bridge's tower room. The two ogre bodyguards were taking turns doing two-handed lifts with a chunk of granite the size of a home entertainment system. "Why are they always in pairs?" Theo asked. "Ogres, I mean. Nobody's ever got just one." Button smiled his pointy smile. "Is that truly what you came up here to ask me? The reason is that they are usually brother and sister, at least among what the fairy lords call the better houses. Better meaning, of course, richer. It is a superstition among the flower folk that the siblings work together better than any others, and since ogres often give birth to male and female twins, and since the security trades draw ogres in the same way that house cleaning draws farishers and home management draws hobs, it is not impossible to find brother and sister pairs willing to work as guards, especially since they can draw the highest salaries." He looked over to Choo-Choo and Topsy, then lowered his voice. "In fact, the belief runs so strong that when one sibling is killed, even when that death saves their master's life, the other is almost always let go afterward. Can you imagine something so terrible? To lose your twin and then your job as well. But it is only a belief, as so many things are, unquestioned and even foolish. A surviving ogre twin called a widow or widower will often be a very fierce protector for the next master, since they no longer have divided loyalties." He shook his head. "The flower folk never understand that, or do not want to believe it, and they continue with their fetish of sibling bodyguards. It is a common insult among the fairy lords to say, 'So-and-so's guards never even met until they started working together,' meaning that so-and-so was too poor to afford to hire twins." Theo watched the gleam of sweat on leathery hides, the bulge of muscles. "So are your bodyguards brother and sister?" Button laughed. "These two, they are indeed. But I am no slave to flower fashions. I hasten to say they are the bodyguards of Caradinus Primrose. They came with him, but he has transferred them to me, I suppose. He fears for my life. He is a kind fellow, Primrose. I wouldn't have agreed with you the first day, but I think I do now. How did he come to be here? He's never said anything to me about it." Button poured himself another bowl of tea. "I sense that you are avoiding the true concern that brought you here, Theo Vilmos. But I am in no hurry, and we may reach the mountain by many roads." He sipped, contemplated. "Actually, how Primrose came to be here is very closely wrapped up with how I came to be here. I wondered about that, but I didn't know if it was rude to ask. It is never rude to ask a goblin anything, because we love to tell tales. But what you will get, as you must know by now, is a story with a hole in it, as we always say. Perhaps you have thought on this a bit, Theo Vilmos. Perhaps you have said to yourself, Button must have suffered some terrible loss at the hands of the flower folk to bear them such a grudge. Perhaps you imagined my family brutally slaughtered, or my mate ripped from my arms and dishonored by young fairy lords. But it is nothing so simple. In fact, I wonder how often it is that people who have suffered such losses can work usefully toward the sort of changes of which I dream. It seems to me that when the wheel on which a pot is made is crooked, the pot will be crooked also, however ambitious the potter. The bigger the pot, the more severe will be the flaws. Make it big enough, and that original crookedness will cause it to shatter the first time you set it over the fire. That is how I feel. I believe a change is coming for the way we live. I look back and see I have been on a long journey, and some of it has been through evil times, but nothing so simple as they killed my family and thus they must be overthrown. My mother and father are alive, living here in this city. My father is a gardener, now with a business of his own, taking care of the grounds of some of the greatest houses. He is happy, or he thinks he is. My mother, too, after many years washing windows and cleaning floors, now has the leisure to spend time with her grandchildren. You see, Theo, I have several brothers and sisters, and they are not so concerned with the machineries of fairy as I am. They have lived more conventional lives. So my mother, too, believes herself happy. Perhaps she is. Ah, but you see, I had the evil luck to achieve some education. I was the youngest, and so by the time I grew, my parents could scrape together enough money to send me to one of the Goblin academies. You look surprised. There are such things, truly. I didn't doubt it, Theo said. I only... Are they just for goblins? Of course. The flower families and their admirers are hard put to share schools and neighborhoods with lesser fairies of their own type. I imagine your friend Cumber Sedge could tell you some stories of what it means to be a fairisher living in one of the high houses. He has. Just so. No, the flower gentry are not yet ready to see their children studying alongside goblin children. For one thing, it might make them question the difference between us that they have always seen as beyond dispute. And now you may hear a little bitterness in my voice, Master Vilmos, because of course I did not conceive these ideas by chance. There is no tale of some singular terror, but there is of course a catalogue of petty insults and small denials heaped one upon the other, day after day, until taken together, they weigh more than any one event. I do not know much of the mortal world, but I imagine there are people there who experience the same things I have. There are, of course. Then I wish I could have met such mortals. It would have been instructive to consider the similarities and differences. What drives me is not what you would think, perhaps. The worst was not when some rich idiot would curse me and call me a skin-eater or suggest I was dirty or a drunkard without bothering to learn anything about me. Even the knowledge that had we goblins proved useful for their power generation needs, our entire race would have been burned away like kindling by the flower lords with scarcely a second thought, was not what galled me most. That is almost too big for one home soul to encompass. No, the worst was that even the kinder fairies I met, the decent sort, had to keep reminding themselves that I was another living, thinking being. The surprise when I said something intelligent, the praising of almost any achievement by me as if I were a farm animal who had learned to solve cipher charms. It was this, more than the outright cruelties that ate at me, Theo Vilmos. And when I came out of the academy, afire with new ideas and puzzled that all my classmates were not blazing too, it was to discover that my own family no longer understood me either, and that there was no occupation awaiting me where I could usefully employ my mind. Unless I were to strike it lucky and be taken up as a sort of curiosity by one of the more unconventional flower families, as with your friend Cumber, I could look forward to nothing more challenging than clipping the hedges of the wealthy, or perhaps owning a small store on the edge of Goblin Town. Years went by, and I could find no satisfying uses for my learning, for my ideas. You have seen the condition of our society, Theo Vilmos. It is not a happy place, and the more I studied it, the more I learned of what had happened since the Gigantine War. and the death of the king and queen, the more I became convinced that the edifice was rotting from within. Perhaps it is wishful thinking, because if the system survives, I doubt I will see any change for my own people within my lifetime, however much longer it lasts. He smiled and looked over at Choo-Choo and Topsy, who were resting and drinking from a bucket of water. Which will likely not be long, no matter how well prepared Primrose's ogres might be. He poured himself more tea. There are no great surprises in this tale, Theo, as I mentioned. I met Caradinus Primrose while my father had the contract to maintain the endless north lawns of Primrose House. We are great ones for agreement and contracts, we goblins. We hold our honor dearer than our lives, and we have always considered our given word the most sacred bond. Thus a contract, any contract, is to us a thing of powerful science. To my proud father, this compact with the Flower family seemed a sort of acceptance by his betters, whereas to them he was only another sort of servant. But that is beside the point. Caradinus has always been an unconventional member of a very conventional class, and he went out of his way to talk to us and the other laborers on the family estate. He had even learned some words of Goblin, which he liked to practice. He chuckled, then had to wipe tea off his lower lip. By the taproot, he speaks it abominably, like a man with a cockatrice struggling to get out of his mouth. But never tell him I said so. He looked quickly over to the bodyguards again, in case they had heard. It is admirable. Caradinus has tried to learn. But the first time he tried it on myself and two of my comrades, he actually came up to us and said, in our tongue, "Greetings, my head is Primrose the smallest, and you are commanded to eat your names with me." The habit of subservience runs very deep, not surprisingly, when my people have been killed in the past for insufficient respect in nearly all the high houses. And every work camp in Willow and Birch has a grave pit, where the bodies of those goblins who have been worked to death or have resisted authority can be discarded. So we did not laugh. I found out later he would not have minded, or rather he would only have minded that he had the words so badly wrong. Theo didn't want to think too much about grave pits. So you became friends? Button looked surprised. Oh, no, not so easily. I still am not sure whether we could call each other friends. He and I are from different worlds, almost as much as you and I. But we spoke often and learned from each other. He... Your pardon, I have an old injury to my throat. He thought more about the problems of the world than any flower I have met, although we did not always agree on the solutions. And he was still bound very strongly to some of the most conservative ideas of honor and tradition, even as he questioned things that were more fundamental, like the difference between types of fairies and the inequalities of our society. The goblin took a long drink of tea. Primrose was a great help to me when I most needed him, although it troubled his principles, I think. But it is a mark of how different he is from his fellows, that just as he weighed his debt of honor against you in the light of what he learned, then decided he had been wrong. So he put even his own beliefs to the test when it mattered. In any case, he helped me to escape when no one else of his class would have even considered. So I left my family and our little foothold in society behind. When Primrose found me again, he too had begun to break with his own clan, although it was more in his heart than in his head. He loved his family, you see, and could not entirely separate who they were from what they were. Button poured himself a little more tea, then filled Theo's bowl as well. He was not ready yet to break entirely with the way of life in which he had been raised, and I think he still harbors some hopes that it can be simply reshaped. I do not feel the same. He showed his long teeth. It was not a smile. But we agree that change must come, and he is honorable. So, no, Theo Vilmos. Caradinus Primrose and I are not quite friends. I fear the gulf between our peoples is too great. But we have found something that is useful and perhaps even comforting to both of us. Theo sipped the tea. Somewhere he had lost the thread. But you said he helped you to escape. Escape what? It sounded like you were just working for your father and... He lowered the bowl. Oh, I get it. That's the hole in the story, huh? Button took a little more tea. Do I have to guess? You had to escape because you did something. Got in trouble, right? Button swirled the dregs in the bowl and looked back at Theo. But you didn't do anything to his family because then he would have thought he had to kill you, just like he did with me. He pondered. And you didn't just run away or put up some inflammatory posters or something because you said escape. And you also said his principles were troubled, so you must have done something really bad. Theo suddenly found the yellow, slot-eyed stare difficult to meet. Did you kill someone? One of the big deal fairies? Button's very sharp teeth appeared again. You are practically a goblin yourself now, Theo Vilmos. You have filled the hole in the story. More tea? Hang on. I've been helping you because you seem like you're trying to do the right thing. But I think I need to know about this. He looked over to the bodyguards, who had finished their workout and were regarding him with an offhand but nevertheless focused sort of interest, as though they could feel his tension from across the room. What happened? Nothing surprising when you consider how my ideas had been changing. I was in the street waiting for the bus. A very simple thing. And just in front of me, a fairy began to beat a goblin porter who had dropped one of his packages. I still do not know that poor goblin porter's name, and I fear he may have suffered badly. That the authorities must have afterward assumed that he knew me, but in truth I was a stranger to him. In fact, perhaps it happened because he was a stranger to me. In that moment, while the fellow I only found out later was a member of the Hydrangea clan, bludgeoned him with a heavy walking stick until he could not get up, then continued to kick and beat him, that huddled, whimpering figure became every goblin I knew. Myself, my father, struggling through night courses at a shabby school to learn polite words to soothe his fairy masters. My brothers and sisters living in urban hovels, 6 to a bedroom, and still calling them nests, as if that would make them so. And all the nameless corpses in the lime pits of Willow. To me, he was every one of us, and his self-promoted master was the dead hand of the flower nobility, who had not been content to take our lands and our forests away, but now must crush us like insects. That is where my other name comes from, Theo, the one I have kept hidden until now. We hide them because they are names of shame, deliberately taken. They remind us every day that we are lowly and wretched. Do you know what my last free ancestor was named? Shining Stone Fox. When the flower folk took us into captivity, they even took away our names. And those of us who worked in their houses, they named after small and demeaning things, unimportant objects. But the names we saved for ourselves: worm, roach, carrion, stain. These are our legacy of despair and, just perhaps, strength. Bug. I am a bug as far as the flower lords are concerned, a lowly and crawling thing. But on that day, they learned that even the lowliest thing can bite. Anger came off him now like a shimmer of heat. Theo could almost squint his eyes and see it. Paradoxically, as he spoke, Button became more and more still, as if he were retreating back into some internal place that Theo could not even imagine. It was too horrible to watch any longer. I threw myself at the beast from Hydrangea House with only the idea that I might absorb some of the beating, and it would give the porter a chance to escape. But he could not rise, many bones broken, and the fairy lordling turned his attention to me. He was astonished by my arrival, but the astonishment quickly became a rage, and he struck out at me with his stick, damaging my throat. It is still in my speaking to this day. But that first look of surprise he gave me did something to me that the blows only strengthened. He could not believe that anyone, even another goblin, would be so foolhardy as to interfere with him. Do you understand? He felt he had every right to beat that porter to death. And it was true. The bus stop was full of all kinds of fairy folk, big and small. Some turned away in dismay, but the most simply watched. They were not surprised, not outraged. I went mad, Jovimos. He struck me and struck me again while I hung onto his leg. I was too close for him to hit me as hard as he would have liked, and before he could immobilize me with some charm or call for help, I climbed up his body and I ripped open his neck so that he bled to death. Yes, with these teeth. Theo sat through the long silence, not sure what to think. Button had certainly ceased to be the charming, cartoonish character he had thought him to be, but now that he considered it, even with the sick feeling in his stomach, he had to wonder if that Button had ever truly existed. No, he had been a version that Theo wanted to believe, a sort of Mahatma Gandhi of the Fairyland Revolution. Button smiled, but this time kept the sharp ends of his fangs hidden, perhaps in deference to Theo's troubled expression. You do not like the mud bug Button you see now so much, eh? Then I should tell you that I have killed again, twice. Both times to defend myself and avoid capture. And once captured, Theo, have no doubt that after a few months as an unhappy guest of Lord Monkshood and his parliamentary constables, I would wind up in a lime pit somewhere, or a furnace. Neither victim was anyone that I think you would mourn much, but that may not lessen the offense in your eyes. They were fairies, your kind. I had no right to resist them, let alone kill them. But I did. People like that aren't my kind, whether I think of myself as a fairy or a mortal. But the lines are not so easy to draw, Theovimos, as I think I told you the other day. You have already helped me. As a result of that help, people may die. Not the innocent, I hope, but war is a demon in a box, and when the lid opens, it flies where it wishes to fly. Theo had not come to the bridge house with the idea of exploring Button's background. He was too consumed with his own problems for that. But he realized that the goblin had his own agenda and had deliberately set him a sort of quandary. More holes, he thought. He straightened, met the goblin's melted butter stare. If you're asking me if I want to join you, the answer is still not entirely. I'm sympathetic. I've been here long enough to see that things are wrong, that a change is needed. And your enemies are my enemies, I guess. I don't know. What do you want to hear from me? I still want your help. I'll still do my best to help you, if it makes sense to me. Button shook his head, amused. You are no soldier, Vilmos, that is certain. Soldiers are not allowed to make such distinctions. But I have soldiers, those who will do what they are told and only think about it afterward, if at all. And I suppose that until we know why you are so important to Hellebore and Thornapple and their minions, you have some bargaining power. Speaking of doing what you're told, Theo said, what exactly were we trying to accomplish with Streety at Elysium House? I saw something on the screen, well, on the mirror, I guess, about getting permission for one immigrant laborer and one livestock animal. Button nodded. Yes, and you and Streety Nettle and Cumber Sedge and Courthook did your jobs very well. But what does it mean? What are you going to accomplish by smuggling one person and one animal into the city? Unless it's a giant riding on a dinosaur or something. A dinosaur? Ah, wait, yes, I have heard of those fabled beasts. The goblin laughed, a quiet hissing sound. You are full of wit, Vilmos. No, that is not quite what I planned. But I think you are best not knowing. After all, we are all liable to capture, and the technicians of Hellebore House in particular are very, very skilled. But you cannot tell what you do not know, no matter how much you might wish to do so. But the goblin suddenly looked up. Theo turned to see Caradinus Primrose waiting in the doorway, his face a smoothly handsome mask of patience. Ah, you are returned, my comrade, said Button. Please come and sit with us. I will make more tea. Primrose seated himself cross-legged on one side of the rug. He nodded to Theo in a way that was not unfriendly, but he seemed in no hurry to speak. In fact, both he and Button were quite content to sit in silence while the teapot heated on the brazier. Even though he had not actually talked to Button about what was most important, Theo began to wonder if they were waiting for him to leave so they could talk in private, and he was just ignorant of the Fairyland's social protocols. I did have something else I wanted to discuss with you, he said. Jesus, man. Applecore's a prisoner bait to trap you, and you make it sound like you don't think there's enough donuts in the break room at work. Something important. Really important. Button inclined his head. Of course, Vilmos. Should I leave? Asked Primrose. No, in fact, I'd like to hear what you think about this too. He sipped his now cold tea. But I don't want to hold you two up either. Primrose almost smiled. It is true that I have something I wish to give to Button, and the sooner the better. He raised an eyebrow in inquiry. Button nodded. Good, Primrose said. It feels very heavy to me. Not in weight, but in substance, and I have felt that all eyes were on me. He reached into the pocket of his long coat. Did you have trouble? Less than I expected. It was quite strange. I would not be able to walk into my own house without being arrested, but I was able to walk into the Parliamentary Museum, and not only did no one recognize or question me, I was able to take it out of the case using only the simplest charm to quell the protections. He withdrew something wrapped in dull velvet or fur and held it out to Button. I suppose it is because the wing dedicated to the Goblin Wars is not often visited these days. The cases were dusty, the room empty. Button cradled the bundle, apparently in no hurry to unwrap it. Theo felt his heart quicken. Was it some legendary goblin weapon? It wasn't big enough to be a sword or an axe. Maybe some sacred dagger or a kind of magic gun that could kill hellebores from a mile away. The goblin peeled back the black covering. "It's a stick," said Theo in surprise, and then raised his hand to his mouth, afraid he had insulted a sacred goblin treasure. Treasured or not, it was definitely a stick, a piece of a slender branch about 18 inches in length. Bark had been peeled from it in a spiral pattern, and signs that could have been writing, but which, unlike normal fairy writing, Theo could not read, had been carved into the white wood where the bark was gone, and then rubbed with something dark to make them visible. "It is indeed," said Button, almost smiling. His eyes seemed unusually bright. "Small things make all the difference." He contemplated the object for a moment. "Should I do it now?" "No, perhaps not yet. An audience is what I need, I think." As Theo watched in befuddlement, the goblin carefully wrapped the stick in the covering cloth again and tucked it into his robe. "I thank you, Caradmus Primrose," he said. "You have perhaps changed the world. Let us hope it is for the better." The fairy nodded solemnly. For a long, silent moment, they just looked at each other. Then, as if on cue, they turned their attention to Theo. He was still struggling to understand what he had just witnessed, especially the air of high seriousness that had surrounded the passing of a piece of wood. But he had already been Button's guest for what must be a couple of hours without mentioning his true purpose. "Shall I start?" he asked. The goblin nodded and poured him more tea. Button already knew most of what Theo had experienced since coming to Fairy, but Primrose still did not know many of the details, so Theo quickly sketched out his recent history, trying to make clear how much Applecore had done for him. Then he told them both about the bit of broadcast news, or whatever it was, he had seen on the mirror cases in the display window, hellebore, and the nasty bell jar beside him on the desk. "And don't tell me it's a trap, because I know that. I may not know why they want me, but I'm not an idiot." He stared at Primrose and Button as if daring them to suggest otherwise. "But you both think a lot about honor, so I know you'll understand that I can't just leave her to suffer, even if I know that me trying to rescue her is exactly what they want." The fairy and the goblin were quiet for some time after he finished. Theo was beginning to wonder what the two of them were like together on their own. Did they even talk, or just sit side by side, silent as bookends? "I am not surprised by much," said Primrose at last, "but I am surprised to learn that Quilius Tansy would do this. Not because I like the fellow, I never have, but because I did not know he coveted anything enough to be bought by hellebore." "His life, perhaps," Button offered. "Perhaps." Primrose did that sinuous thing that among the flower folk passed for a shrug, but to Theo looked more like a snake easing an itch in its non-existent shoulders. "But this does not answer Master Vilmos." The goblin nodded. "You know, Theo Vilmos, that even were every living creature in this camp to take up arms and march on Hellebore House, it would not be enough. Zyrus Jonquil is alive and gathering some resistance fighters from the other flower houses. You met him, I believe, and there are others who might play some part, but even if we all joined together, our numbers would still be very small compared to what Hellebore and his allies can muster. We hope to throw down that grim place of Hellebore's when our day comes, Theo, but I cannot say how far away that day will be, or whether your sprite friend will be alive to see it. Although, of course, there is always hope. So there is little I can offer you in the way of direct action. We cannot allow our plans to be changed, and thus put at risk
for any one individual, especially at such a critical point.
I don't care, Theo said, and realized that in an odd way that was true.
Well, I do care. Of course I do. I don't want to die. But I can't just leave her there either, so I might as well not think about it too much. Just help me. Help me figure out what's going to be the least likely to get me caught, even if the odds of failing would only be 99% instead of 100.
You must give us more time to think, Theovinos, said Button gently. You have waited some time to tell us of your problem. Allow us a few moments to think about it.
He sat back, frustrated, but relieved that at least they weren't trying to tell him that Applecore was just a casualty of war and that he should forget about her. Unfortunately, their acceptance of his debt of honor had also made it clear to him that he really didn't have much choice. He was going to have to do more than talk about it. He was going to have to risk his life and probably lose it, trying to get her free. The thought of what he was up against made him go cold all over, made his balls try to climb back into his body. Now he understood why the military made sure you had a bunch of other guys with you, so that you'd be ashamed to run, and why there was usually a sergeant with a gun, too.
What about the one who lives down at the waterfront? Primrose said suddenly. You know who I mean. The old one.
While Theo was wondering how mind-bogglingly ancient you had to be before a fairy called you old, Button stirred and said, You refer to the one often called the remover of inconvenient obstacles? He has shown no sign of being sympathetic to our cause. Rather the reverse.
Yes, but that is because he is largely mercenary. Certainly in the most recent years, he has done little, so rumors suggest, that was not purely for profit, even if that profit was more often in favors than in gold.
Primrose frowned. It hardly even creased his smooth forehead.
It is not a pleasing idea, I know, but unless we can come up with another. Hang on. Who is this remover of obstacles? I mean, it sounds like an old Black Sabbath song title or something.
Theo pushed on past his companion's blank looks.
Just tell me what you know. I deserve to be in on the conversation, since I'm the one who's going to be putting his ass on the line. The mortal world gives you a very colorful way of talking, noted Primrose. But you are right, of course. I'll tell you what I know, and Button can supply whatever's missing. Never expect a goblin to fill the gaps in the tale, Button said with a quick smile. It is against our nature.
Theo thought Primrose looked like he would have liked to appreciate the joke, but hadn't yet had the humor update for his software.
Yes, said the fairy. Well, what little I know of the one called the Remover is second or even third hand. He is very old. Nobody I know can remember a time when he was not around, and when I was growing up, our nurses used to frighten us by threatening that he would come to take us if we were bad. I am told he is extremely unpleasant to look at. And in a world full of ogres and trolls, Theo thought, that must mean somebody is pretty damn ugly. But what does he do? Only what he wishes to do, and only for those who can afford his price. He has amassed secrets of science over his centuries of study that no one else can touch. It is said that many a lord thought to be too well protected to be assassinated has instead found that the remover's terrible face is the last thing he sees. But these are not the only sorts of obstacles he removes, only the most dramatic. As I said, his command of the scientific arts is broad. Doubtless, many things in our society, things we now take for granted, began as a notation in the remover's diary. So he's part wizard, part mercenary killer? I will say this for him. I have never heard of him killing an innocent. That proves nothing, though. There are no doubt as many false tales as true, and doubtless far more tales that have never been told at all. The fairy lord turned to Button.
Do you agree? The goblin nodded slowly. You know more than I. He has never had dealings with my folk, to my knowledge. He is powerful. He is without loyalty, except to his agreements, as far as anyone can tell. That is perhaps the true sum of what is known about him. And how on earth would I persuade this person to do something for me? Theo asked. Even assuming he could help me get into Hellebore House. Or perhaps he could get your friend out without you having to risk yourself, said Button. Would that not be the best alternative? Good God, yes. I'm no hero. But why should he help me? The goblin tented his long finger so that the talons clicked against each other. You are an unusual person, Theovimos, and there are still mysteries around you. Perhaps there is something you know that can buy the remover's help. And maybe you'll just whack me on the head and call Hellebore on the shell phone and make some easy money. But I suppose it's a better risk than me trying to sneak into Hellebore House in a wagon full of guest towels or something. He spoke with a lightness he did not feel. He had more than an inkling now of what it might mean to know your platoon was heading for the front lines at dawn. So just tell me where it is, and I'll go. Button raised his hand. I hope you would prepare with a little more caution than that. Also, there are still things in your story I would like to understand better before you go to see the remover. Before I go get myself killed, is what you mean. The goblin smoothed the fur on his jaw. We are none of us promised anything but the last breath we take, Theovimos. That was so obviously and depressingly true, it made Theo want to kill himself now, just to end the suspense. Okie dokie. Oh, this is a tough one. 753. I guess I should start the next section. Even though it's like not just another chapter, but it's a whole new section. Okay, I'll read for a few more minutes just so we get up near the top of the hour. Part 4, The Lost Child. Chapter 34, Interlude with Van Gogh Stars. No, you're not going. It's my problem. I'll deal with it. Cumber looked irritated, but spoke calmly. You'll do nothing of the sort. You're no hero, Theo. Neither am I, but maybe together we might manage to equal one Lord Rose or whatever. It's not a battle, Cumber. I'm not going to fight anyone with a sword or anything. I'm just going to ask for some help. From the remover of inconvenient obstacles, one of the most dangerous creatures in all the world. You don't even know how to find your way there, do you? I wrote down the directions. It didn't sound very heroic, he had to admit. I know you like Applecore, Cumber, but you don't owe her the way I do. She saved my life. The Ferrisher shook his head. I'm not demanding to go in your place, Theo. I'm just going with you. We'll have a better chance of making it work, especially if something goes wrong. You don't know the city very well, Theo. No, I'm definitely going with you. The tent flap opened, and Mistress Twinge looked in. Going where? Theo almost told her, Misery being the inveterate lover of company. But a look from Cumber seemed to indicate caution. Nowhere special. Just having an argument. Ah. She slouched in and arranged herself in a corner of the tent. I like arguments. Can I play too? The goblin Coathook came in behind her, dark and quiet as a rain cloud slipping across the sky. He nodded to Theo and Cumber as he settled on his bedroll. Hey, Coathook, that was a world-class fit you threw in, what's it called? Elysium House, Theo said. You really looked like you were dying or something. He was, said Mistress Twinge cheerfully. There's too many people with diagnostic charms around these days. A little poison makes it look good and feel good, no matter what charm you use to read it with. You just have to make sure to take the antidote before the stuff hits. Right, Hooky? Coat Hook was wearing his poker face today. He didn't even blink at the nickname. Hang on, said Theo. I'm not sure I'm getting this. Coat Hook took real poison so he could fake that fit in the records office? Had to, the Puka explained. Most of the gods in places like that have at least some elementary healing training. They got charms that will tell them what's wrong, so they know whether to call for an ambulance or just make the person comfortable. So Coat Hook had a little sack of iron filings in his pocket and a healing charm to make him right again. Take the first, wait until you begin to feel it, then take the other before you forget. She chuckled. Good, huh? Jeez. Wow, Theo said. So all that screaming, and you were really feeling that? Coat Hook looked at him with inscrutable yellow eyes. Yes. He unrolled his bedroll and stretched out. Sleeping now. He closed his eyes and appeared to begin doing so immediately. After a long moment's silence, Mistress Twinge stood up, pulling a cigar out of the pocket of her red overalls. Well, I can see you young lovers want to be alone, so I think I'll just go for a walk and a smoke. Maybe I'll grab Streety on his way back from Button and teach the boy how to drink or something. That might be amusing. She gave them a jaunty salute. Have fun, kids. Is that where Streety is? Theo asked when the Puka was gone. With Button? I was just over there and I didn't see him. Cumber shrugged. Anything else you want to talk about now that we're agreed I'm going to come along to see the remover? Are you still planning on tomorrow? I guess. Button wouldn't be specific, but I got the feeling things are about to start happening, and if something's really up, I want to be ready with the information on how to get into Hellebore House. If we can get any, that is. Theo rubbed his face. Watching Coat Hook's placid slumber was making him tired, and it was getting late. What do you think Button has planned, anyway? Do you think he has a hope in hell against the flower houses? Cumber frowned at the unfamiliar expression. I don't know, Theo. He's awfully smart. Primrose isn't stupid either, though he's not in Button's league, but if they really think there's a chance, they must know something we don't, because even if you gave every able-bodied adult in this camp a weapon, they still wouldn't have a chance against the Parliamentary Guard, let alone Hellebore's dragons. It looks quite hopeless to me, but they used to hunt dragons, you know. Goblins did, I mean. Button's people. Perhaps that means he's tough and hard-minded enough to pull it off. Cumber didn't sound very much like he believed it, though. The dragons seem to have caught everyone by surprise, said Theo. I remember Daffodil shouting something about it wasn't fair or that Hellebore had broken the rules. There have always been dragons in Fairy, said Cumber. But the big ones were killed off a long time ago in the dragon campaigns, back in the days of the Tree Lords, the first generation of fairies. Everyone agreed the dragons had to go. They were just too dangerous, too big and too smart. Only a few of the smallest survived, mostly hiding in caves in the high mountains. Every now and then one would carry off a few sheep or something, but basically they were scavengers living in remote areas and nobody even knew they were there except the wild goblins. But during the last Gigantine War, it was clear to everyone that we were going to have to come up with something new to beat the giants, so Parliament decided to start a breeding program, but only after a lot of very bitter argument. See, the dragons had almost wiped us out early on, and a lot of folk weren't too pleased about bringing them back. All kinds of agreements were signed by all the houses, swearing that these dragons would be kept under control, that they could only be flown by an act of a full parliament of blooms, and they could never, 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 never be used against fairy folk. So Hellebore broke that law. Of course, although he got Parliament to rubber stamp it once the smoke had cleared, because the winners make the rules, Theo. A depth of bitterness was in Cumber's words, Theo hadn't heard since the night in the club named Christmas. That's how it always works. They make the rules and they write the histories. So if things end the way they're probably going to, Hellebore and Thornapple and those other lizards will be the heroes, and Button and Primrose will be the villains. You and me too, if they even remember us. 500 years from now, there'll probably be a public holiday to celebrate the anniversary of our executions. Thanks for that pleasant thought, said Theo. And that's where I'm going to stop. And so, thank you so much. Lovely to have you with me. And always a pleasure. Thank you all especially very much for all the kind words during a difficult week for us here at the Beale Williams Honor Rancho. Somebody asked me the other day, what did I mean by Honor Rancho? I'm not actually sure to be telling you the truth, but on the road coming back through the, I think it's coming back through the mountains on Highway 5 out of LA. There's something or other. It says something Honor Rancho. Honor spelled like my honor is more important to me than my life, and Rancho spelled like rancho. So I assume I think it was some kind of a facility for youthful offenders or something like that. So anyway, it stuck in my mind as going with Rancho. Not that you needed to know that, not that you cared, not that it will ever come back or come up again in your life unless you're driving back from LA. And you happen to pass the sign and you'll go, oh, that's what that weird guy, that weird writer guy was talking about. Anyway, from the Beale Williams house, I just want to send good thoughts to you all and say, be good to yourselves, be good to your loved ones, be good to your neighbors and friends, help out some people who need being helped out. It's a tough time for a lot. And sometimes you don't even know when someone's having a tough time. So unless you get in touch with somebody you haven't seen for a while, you may not find out. We are doing well, so don't worry about us, but do what you can to help those around you. And with that, I am going to say thank you once again, because those are big words in my vocabulary, always. And I will see you next Saturday night, Sunday morning, my time, at 2 a.m., and then again at the same time a week from now. So with that, I say farewell, auf Wiedersehen. All right, that made me think of Christopher Plummer, who we lost this week. Farewell, bye, auf Wiedersehen, bye. Whatever it is, I can't remember the song anymore, because I haven't seen it since I was like 7. Anyway, but I do want to say bye. Thanks. See you soon.